Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Star Wars Obi-Wan Kenobi Episode 4 review. We are going to be talking full spoilers for Episode 4 of Obi-Wan Kenobi. So if you haven't watched the episode yet, watch it, come back, and check out our review here. We're going to dive into all the details, but before we get started, please hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel for all of our Star Wars content. We have a ton of Obi-Wan Kenobi stuff throughout the rest of the month and at the past month. Check all of that out. It's on the channel homepage. You can check out the Obi-Wan Kenobi playlist, as well as all our coverage from Star Wars Celebration and all the news from there. We were there in Anaheim and we got to see all of that cool stuff. So without further ado, let's get into Obi-Wan Kenobi Episode 4. Right off the bat, I would say this is my least favorite episode of the show. I don't necessarily think that means it's a bad episode. I would say it's a good episode that doesn't do anything crazy. I think, and we kind of talked about on our predictions and speculation that we expected, just with the nature of an arc, that the second act was kind of wrapping up in that last episode, episode 3, and this episode was going to kickstart us towards a third act of the show, where it was going to be a little bit slower and it was going to be probably a little less expansive of a story. Well, it was a less expansive story, but it was a very fast-paced 30-minute episode that just man, I don't understand how these event series we keep getting these 30-minute episodes. It doesn't matter if it's Star Wars or Marvel. We keep getting 6-episode seasons, and all of a sudden it's like one random one is 30 minutes and all the others are 45 or 50, and it doesn't really make any sense. I feel like that runtime makes it feel a bit more filler than it really should be. But when I kind of put it in perspective and look at the story plot points of this episode, there wasn't really anything in here that I feel like they couldn't have briefly done in the last episode or at the beginning of this episode that really can kind of connect into whatever them finding the rebel base or discovering that the rebels are much bigger than they expected. The path is a bigger thing than they ultimately realized. And this is going to be like kind of the early onset of the Imperials realizing that that the rebels are organized, that there are cells that are bigger than they really expected. I think that's going to be a main focus of the show, obviously, with Obi-Wan kind of kickstarting that whole thing. And that was kind of the one direction I didn't really want them to go with the show. So in that regard, I'm a little disappointed because even though episodes 1, 2, and 3 were so big and grand, and they still had a lot of fighting and world hot, like different planet, all 3 episodes, we were, really galaxy spanning. They were still focused on Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan was at the heart, his trauma, him coming to grips with Anakin being alive. All of that stuff was still at the heart of the story, where this episode felt more like nobody was really the central character. It was just kind of a fast-paced, let's get Leia back. How do we escape Leia? And then really the biggest arc, I would say, in this whole thing is Obi-Wan kind of rediscovering his form with the lightsaber. And we get some really cool stuff in here. And I think I'll talk a bit more about my positives, I guess, a little later. But I think there's some really cool fight scenes in here. Obi-Wan does some cool things that we get to see him start to get back on track. But really having Leia kidnapped again, for me, I didn't really feel like there was a need to have her kidnapped again, other than just to give Obi-Wan a platform to get back into this and to show that the rebels are here, which I felt like we could have done in a different way. But anyway, what are your thoughts on Obi-Wan Kenobi episode 4?
It's just an episode that goes at it. It doesn't really let you breathe much. Um, and I know we both personally wanted something that was more. How do I put it? Contemplative in this episode. Um, we've been watching the Marvel series. We've been watching all the Star Wars series. Obviously, we've been covering that all on our channel, and since we've been starting our podcast from the very beginning, and I will say these event series that we have seen so far, we've only seen Mando as an episodic show. Maybe that kind of changes in season 3. Uh, the Book of Boba Fett and Kenobi are both events, really, like things just start to finish. We're flying through it, and it really does feel like a comic book that you just pick up and then you're like read through, and it's only like 10 sheets of pages that are split into 20 or something, right? And you read through that, you're like, oh, that was a great comic. And you love the art, you love something about it, and then you don't really think too much about it. And the medium doesn't really expect you to think about it too much longer than time that you're reading it, which shouldn't be long. When we're watching a show like this and you give us a 38-minute episode that feels exactly like that, I don't know. We've seen so much more in the same format that is longer, that is more not even contained or grounded. It's been more expansive at times, it's been divergent at times. This one was an episode that was like, okay, let's show a little bit of everything that we've kind of been working on. Cool. That's the episode. It's like, oh, that's great. I'd say the biggest selling point for me was seeing Fortress Inquisitorius. That was pretty cool to see it be fully fleshed out. We got a little bit more into it and see the literal depths of it, and you're like, oh, that makes it even more haunting and like dangerous. And visually, this episode was great. There was only like a few slightly wonky things, like the hallway water scene, but other than that, I thought this was like the richest of the CGI we've seen thus far, and I'm assuming they're saving it more and more for 5 and 6. But this does feel like that comic book that you're like, great, that was a solid issue. Next, you're like, okay, we made a little progress, but was it really worthwhile to have a whole other issue here? And with a comic, you can already complain there. With a TV show that only has 6, I feel like you can complain even more because it's like it shouldn't feel like a 38 episode that's minute episode that's only in actuality 32 minutes. Give us 40 minutes of this, and I think whatever criticisms we have are addressed because we get maybe a little bit more of Kenobi dealing with his mental things, right? A little bit more back and forth between him and Anakin Vader, and that symbolism that we did see in this episode, even if it was pretty brief. Um, we get a little bit more of him being a bit more attuned to the Force, a little bit more Riva and Vader. Like we only need tidbits to make this a really strong episode. And it's solid when it could have been great, like the first 3 were for us. And this is not an episode that dims any excitement that I've had so far. If this is the worst that the show is going to offer, I'm more than happy with that because you might have seen our review after Book of Boba Fett. I think episode 4. I think it was the same one here, and it was the one where we have the moped chase and we see Black Chrysanthemum really quickly, and that's really about it. And you're like, okay, that was fine. That was fun. It's cool that we got to see some action. Did I really need it? I feel like we still needed this because the story kind of forced us to deal with the Leia kidnapping. Obi-Wan's not fully healed, but he has to still, rush himself into action. It justified just enough for me, and then the visuals and the action kind of carried it for the rest. Now, if the story can really kick into gear and let's have these final 2 episodes be, a sort of 2-part finale, more than happy with that. And I'm not like one of those people who's like, oh, because we're spending so much time with Leia. As far as we know, Luke could be like, kidnapped or something by now, or he's in huge danger. I don't know. I think Kenobi leaving only draws away attention at this point. There's no other Jedi on Tatooine, presumably. Owen gets whatever he wants, and he can keep Luke even closer and not get distracted by any Skyhopper tour or whatever. Seems like he's pretty safe. So I'm not one of those people complaining about that. I am just complaining about the execution of these elements that you have developed pretty strongly. But for some reason, you've kind of let them simmer in an episode that truly could have been just as great as the first 3.
Yeah, and to that point, like really just expansion of elements, like you're saying, could have added a little bit more to this. Like even the interrogation stuff with Riva and Leia, like I wanted more there. Like we get a little bit of stuff about Riva and her past, like one line, but that could be where you start to kind of reveal who she is, start to kind of give us a taste of who this character is that's we know nothing about for 4 episodes. And we're not on the train of let's hate Riva because she's a villain, because that's her purpose. But obviously, there's more to her, and they're going to reveal at some point. And we could have started revealing those elements in this episode as well. um, the beginning with Obi-Wan flashing back and forth during his trip to the Bacta tank, like stuff like that could have been like the first 5 minutes of this. I was like, okay, here we go. We're doing what we kind of thought. And then all of a sudden he's like, nope, I'm fine. I'm going to rescue Leia. And I was at that point, I was like, oh, come on. Like, let's let's slow it down, Obi-Wan, because you just suffered a catastrophic injury and you got your butt whooped. Like you're not ready to do this stuff. But I like that he didn't come into any contact with Inquisitors or Vader in this, because it would have seemed like a very quick turnaround. I think that part makes sense. Like I feel like all the story beats here, and that's why I still ended up enjoying this episode, even though it's by far my least favorite of the four so far, and the one that I feel like has given us the least to chew on to talk about. But the story here still makes sense. It's still like well told. It's just the fact that it's like it never centers on anything in particular. It never really finds a theme. It never really does something that makes us go, okay, this episode in particular added something new to this overall story, which the first three, each one did, showed us a progression of Obi-Wan as he's falling further and further into ultimately what is probably his darkest moment ever in his career as a Jedi, when he gets absolutely destroyed by Vader in the last episode. So seeing this one kind of just throw us back into the conflict, I definitely wanted more with Obi-Wan. But there were still a lot of cool things to talk about in this episode, particularly, like you said, Fortress Inquisitorius was a highlight for sure. Seeing that, getting to see the different layers to it, getting kind of a better look at the structure, how it all works. Uh, I enjoyed a lot of that, and particularly when we get into the morgue area, that is definitely we kind of see a glimpse of in Rebel season one with the Luminara and Dooley episode where they have her corpse there, but this was on another level. We got to see a ton of dead Jedi. Particularly, the biggest highlight was Terrace Nube from the Clone Wars, a beloved one, and one who's still alive in the High Republic. Uh, we get to see that character, I guess, first time in live action, even though it was probably a CG model in the in the little tank or whatever that thing is. But it was cool. I was a little disappointed because I went back and rewatched that scene like 4 times just to see if I missed anything. And it was a little disappointing that they show us Terrace Nube right off the bat, and then none of the other characters are like even alien. They're all just like people in like costumes. Which I was hoping for, at least a few Easter eggs there. But regardless, it's served that scene served its purpose. We get to see a young Lane and everything. It really gets at Obi-Wan what's happening there. But anyway, what are your thoughts on seeing some of this stuff from Rebels now actualized in this episode?
I mean, it's always great to see Rebels get more validation on screen. It is, in essence, the real source, the beacon of modern Star Wars mythology, because there's nothing about George Lucas in that. And there are obviously characters that George Lucas created along with others during the original trilogy process, but that's all Filoni, baby. That's all his stuff. That's all the ideas, the concepts, the ships, everything that all comes from there. Um, and seeing it be brought to a bit more of like a mainstream live action audience is so cool to me. Like I want to say that to some degree, I wanted to see even more, especially because the stuff that we see in Fallen Order kind of is more atmospheric, um, more open, scarier. It seems like there's a lot more in Fortress Inquisitorius that takes place in the lower levels um, overall in that game than perhaps what we see in this episode. Like we do still see probably not the same exact hallway, but get a hallway water sequence, and that was great. Um, I love when Obi-Wan is first swimming up into the open vent. We see like this like tentacle monster with like a beak and like teeth I mean, I was like, "That's great. That's I would love to see another sea monster just be attached to drawn to the depths of horror and misdeeds and evil Sith doing, right?" And then I was like, "Okay, like it seems like it has cool elements. It's definitely riffing off of Fallen Order and things that we learned in uh, Rebels." But it felt because especially since we followed Indira Verma's Tala character, it felt like, like a really aesthetic looking Imperial base, which I guess to some degree Inquisitors aren't the greatest Force users in the world, but I would expect them to try to cultivate as much possible, even if it is a bit hidden away. And then I actually got to see what they were cultivating, and it is quite literally a morgue of all these dead Jedi Force users. We see a youngling in there, and I'm just like, "Oh my god, Anakin didn't get this one." I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But it's nice to see that this place that was kind of scary and devastating in Fallen Order has a bit more of a sinister, unnatural reason behind it, and it's what I'm assuming to be one of the more deeper parts that we don't get to see in the game or even have it that sort of be hinted at in Rebels. So I thought that was really cool. Um, I, it makes me think a little bit more about how in Rebels when you see Illuminara's body, we see like an image and then the tomb. So it makes it seem like that the Grand Inquisitor in that show just he's like, all right, I'll just take out one of these like samples and bait out these Jedi and hang it on a wall here. It's like okay, because I don't think they're just doing the same process, um, outside. It seems like this would be very much a contained thing. Try to maybe harvest their blood or something for sensitivity purposes, clones, whatever they may be, so that connect that to Bad Batch and presumably what happens in the Mando era slash heir to the Empire canonization that we've been kind of hinting at as being developed. Yeah, I mean that is the biggest part of the episode that at least makes it a joy to watch. It's like everything is set on that place and it looks great. The hallway water sequence could have been a little bit better. But other than that, I again, this show is clearly working with a smaller budget than a movie. I wish it got the Andor treatment, where it's all shot outside and CGI'd. But I don't think Ewan is going to be complaining about being able to see what he's actually interacting in after like 8 years of working on a prequel's blue screen complete setting. And if that makes him happier, if that makes Hayden happier, and the product looks good to great at times, like we were seeing here with the Fortress Inquisitorius. I don't think I can really complain. Hallways were great, Stormtroopers were great. We also saw the Purge Troopers with a new redesign that was more in line with what we would expect with the original trilogy aesthetic. So that was cool. I liked all of it. I really did. And if this was just like another Joshua Tree location like we saw last episode, I would have been like, how are they just like I can't take this anymore? Like please Disney. But no, this was a set that had investment in both volume and practical, and to then play around with canon a bit more, dive deeper, at least in the aesthetic language. That only made me happy. I think if anyone says like this episode is just bland, I can see an argument if you don't like this sort of storytelling. But if you're saying the visual storytelling is bland in this show, I have to fully disagree after seeing this episode.
I'm with you there for sure. They did a lot of really cool things with the visuals here. The lighting, especially, was really really nice. Um, there, I like the like underwater parts of the fortress the most, and seeing all of those elements make you or made me very much so like miss them when we go back to the surface and we see like just all these random Imperials walking around because it does like you said, add that layer of like, yeah, this is just an Imperial base with Inquisitors in it versus like the dark, mysterious Inquisitor fortress. But yes, the bodies really serve so many different purposes, all those practical purposes as well as just morbid trophies. I feel like there's got to be way more Jedi down there that they didn't show, but of course we just got the faceless ones that nobody cares about, and only Terra Sanube. But that was a cool part of the episode, and for sure one of the best parts, I would say. The only part of the episode that really got me off my seat, like, "Oh, there's Sanube," and as for canon as a whole, like, this show has embraced a lot of what this time period is. We've talked so much on our channel about how overdone this whole era between 3 and 4 has been in the Disney canon era of Star Wars, how much we've seen, that at least they're bringing all of it in, like, they're taking the iconography of the Inquisitors from Rebels and changing it to be a 5 years earlier version, and they're taking stuff from Fallen Order, and they're bringing it in right here. They're doing all of that. They're paying attention, at least. I'm at least thankful for that, because it could have gone the even way of some of the animated shows, like, "Oh, we're a show, we're better than the rest of it, and we're not gonna take anything." Well, at least they kind of look at everything that inspired this whole era for s the inspiration of how this should look in live action. And I think, that pretty much wraps up our thoughts on Obi-Wan Kenobi Episode 4. Good episode, could have been better. Does feel a bit fillery, but hopefully, like you said, grand finale, two-parter. Let's dive into Obi-Wan and Anakin's relationship, because that really is something I still want to see that was promised, and these last two episodes can really deliver on that. So thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't yet, please like the video down below, comment below, let us know what you thought of this episode, what you thought of Fortress Inquisitorius, all of that stuff down below, and then subscribe to the channel if you haven't, for all of our continued coverage of Obi-Wan Kenobi. We will be doing predictions and speculation on Friday. Check that out for episode 5. We will be talking about that on Friday, so you'll want to check out that video as well as the rest of our Obi-Wan Kenobi coverage. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll see you next time.